was a fireside chat on building RedPajama. For those of you that are unaware or haven't heard yet, RedPajama is a project to create a set of leading fully open source models. And they completed the first step, which was the reproduction of the Llama training data set of over 1.2 trillion tokens. So really exciting to get this behind the scenes view from our two speakers, who are Zhang, who is the co-founder of Together. He splits his time between United States and Switzerland, very jealous, as well as our co-founder and head of technology at Snorkel, the reigning cornhole champion, who I've been mentioning throughout the day today. You'll see him at our at our in-person meetup at 4 p.m. Braden Hancock. So excited to have you both here, and over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Arti. And that's right. Thank you for joining us. For those in the audience, that we've got the Snorkel project began as in research and with an open source project that led to and informed a lot of what we build today in our platform and the research we've continued. And so comes from a similar background in many ways. Originally as a researcher, a bunch of great contributions to the open source, including this RedPajama project, and his current role leading Together, a fantastic startup as well right now in the AI space. So I've admired his work for many years as a researcher, and then now we've been working together the past few months on the RedPajama project and find a bunch of interesting things there. So good to have you with us. Let's start maybe having you give your own introduction on. Let's hear some more first about your background and where you've been researching, over the past decade, and then we'll move right into more details about RedPajama after that.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm an associate professor at ETH Zurich. I'm also one of the co-founder of Together. Essentially, in the last almost 10 years, we have been working on essentially two things. First one, how can we scale up compute, right? So when you have thousands of devices training the same model, how can we optimize the communication, optimizing the synchronization, right? So, and the second direction that we have been working on is really inspired by the Snorkel effort, try to understand data importance, right? Data influence throughout the end-to-end training process of machine learning models, right? So it's very happy to see actually both directions start becoming kind of really relevant to building good language models, right? And really excited to working together with Snorkel in the past couple of months. And hopefully, yeah, we will have something released together soon, yeah.
Awesome. Yes, no, completely agreed. Excited about so many of these results. And I think very appropriately, as you called out, the RedPajama project, while it's, the end result is this family of models, really a lot of where the major contributions have been, in my opinion, is the collection of the data sets to create these models and that reproducible pipeline. And if you could speak to that, one of the things that you all called out as you released the RedPajama models was that this was fully open source, a totally unrestricted license, able to be used for commercial applications, and also would improve reproducibility and research transparency. And would love to hear about, what motivated that for you all, and any notable examples that you've seen of folks taking advantage of this fully open artifact that's now been out for a couple months.
Yeah. So we are kind of also really positively surprised at what people actually doing, giving our data recipe, giving our data, and giving our model, right? So essentially the way that we think about open model is not only about opening up the weights, right? But also about opening up the license. But I think more importantly is try to open up the data itself, which is kind of important, but also the data recipe, right? To have the fully reproducible kind of programmable way to reproduce the data set. So because once you have done that, there are actually multiple things that you can actually do. The first one, you can take the data recipe and apply to, for example, another language, right? So we are working with a whole bunch of partners, try to apply the same RedPajama recipe to different languages, different scenario, different sub-slice of the data, right? So that is kind of only possible when you have the fully reproducible kind of programmable recipe that we have. And also it gives you something that you can monotonically kind of improve. If you realize, oh, there's a bug in the processing, you can actually go back and try to improve it. Then all the downstream application that relies on the data set will also hopefully automatically get better. So, and second, because the data is also open, you actually know what to actually get into your model, right? So if you are not happy that your data is in the data set, right, we can always trace back to the original data and, for example, try to remove it, right? So we can actually identify potential problem of the model and trace back to the data set and then try to improve the model and improve the data. So I think having all of this open is actually very important. So that's why we are actually very excited about the RedPajama projects, We see people apply them to multilingual. We see people do kind of detailed analysis of the data, do detailed deduplication of the data. And hopefully we can actually build on those efforts to have a next version of RedPajama that's even better, and which also turn into an even better model for the community. Yeah.
Yes, no, excellent. And I mean, speaking of the data, there's been a lot of attention paid recently to what data you can and can't train on in terms of permission. With places like Stack Overflow saying that they're going to start charging any company that tries to train on their data, or restrictions from various government entities in different places. So, how would you think about that when an open source community or organization invests the time in training a model like this, and then some portions of that data may become unavailable? How do you handle that from the standpoint of having stable models that aren't kind of at risk of suddenly retroactively violating terms of service at any point in time?
Yeah. So I think so first of all, we should respect what people feel about their data, right? So I think one really positive point, like in my personal opinion, is the effort from Bloom and Big Science, right? So they give people this very kind of easy way to actually opt out like their data, right? So if you are not your data is being used to train this model, right? So of course we should respect that, and because our data is fully open, you can actually see what gets into that and give us a feedback, right? So from our side, right? So we should also kind of respect that your opt-out request and do our best to actually make sure that we remove the data, and then in a way that you can also see, oh, the data is actually getting removed, and now there's a new model coming out of this cleaner version of the data. So I think that's one of the key benefits of having an open data artifact, and then have a model over that. So I think that's something that we will learn from Pythia, from Elucir, from Big Science projects, and try to essentially follow their lead, right?
Yeah. Well, that Big Science project was definitely, I think, a very important moment and piece of open source around these large language models, and this idea that even though these do require quite a bit of resources to create, that is valued in the community, and as a research community together, we can create these things. But even still, when ChatGPT came out and Bard following quickly thereafter, I'd say there definitely was a moment where certainly the chatter you would hear was people wondering, like, is this going to lead to an oligarchy of control of the very few organizations that do have the funds and large data moats to create these models just having totally insurmountable leads? And it really didn't take long. I mean, truly just a couple months for open source to come roaring back with a number of very quick turnaround, very impressive results that now I think have a lot of folks recognizing this is going to be a lot more active, competition, a lot of good options there. What would you say that was, the open source doubters, what were they underestimating or not accounting for in that estimate of, maybe this is game over for the open source world?
Yeah, so first thing, I don't really think they are underestimating anything. So it's really hard to build anything that's kind of close to ChatGPT level of quality, right? So, and if you look at the open model today, there's still a gap, right? So I think very important to really acknowledge that the open model today still have this very big gap, can compare with the close counterpart of it, right? So I think we should acknowledge that. But I think what happened in the last couple of months is people start to see the hope, right? People start to see the pace of improvement in the open community. And if you extrapolate that, right, you have hope that we could catch up as a community. So one thing that at least surprised us from the RedPajama experience is how powerful the community really is when everyone just have the common purpose, and then we contribute what we do the best, and then how much it can really push the community forward. So, RedPajama is a base data, right? So after we have the base data, there's actually a lot of people try to improve the data quality. There's actually multiple models come out trained on RedPajama data. They are a little bit different here and there, and you see this progress driven by the single data set. But also on the other hand, there are also these amazing projects, for example, like Open Assistant, right? So essentially try to create this alignment data, right? For people, we see like in Databricks, there's like Dolly 2, right? All those amazing projects, when they come together, you have this kind of artifact in the open source that become better and better. And I think what happened in the last couple of months is really, I think we have hope right? So as long as we can continue this trajectory of working together, contributing what's unique to us for everyone, and I think, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting year for open source language model. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the rate of progress, I certainly agree, is one of the most inspiring parts, and just seeing the complete flurry of activity from so many sources, contributions from so many different directions, and each building on each other, especially when they are shared in the open, really does result in a very impressive, rate of progress, and in a lot of good directions, whether that's extending to other languages or, getting to different sizes of model that can be used in different environments, more loose licenses, applications, etc. So speaking of model size, llama.cpp, came out a CPU runnable version of Llama, and then you all followed suit with RedPajama CPP. Tell me about that. Do you see, these models, and when they've been kind of shrunk to that size, quantized in the right ways to fit there, is there much loss in quality? Is this more party trick and proof of concept, or would you see real kind of applicability for these types of compressed models?
Oh, yeah. Oh, first of all, it's like the RedPajama CPP is really just a fork of this amazing llama.cpp, right? So all we are doing is a very, very small change. And it's really just built on this amazing project, right? So, but I think in addition to like RedPajama CPP, we also work with people, for example, MLC, right? So, and try to deploy the RedPajama 3 billion model inside your browser, right? So like on iPhone, on Android phone, right? So we actually do see this kind of course, need to quantize it, right? So after quantization, the 3 billion model become like 1.5 gigabyte, right? You can ship that together with your iPhone app. So I think what's interesting there is I do believe this small model have a potential that we haven't fully unleashed yet, right? So I do feel if you kind of co-design the model architecture, the hardware side, and also more important on the data side, if you really put these 3 different dimensions together in the right way, I do feel we could have a much better small model. And that small model will become very powerful because you can have this fully private model, right, local on your device, have access to your data, but never leave that device, right? So, and then you can use a whole bunch of retrieval augmented way to get kind of this context for that model, and then you can do interesting stuff. I mean, I do believe in that. So at this moment, I think we are in the regime that we really see the hope, right? So if you play with the MLC demo, right? So on iPhone, chat with RedPajama 3B, yeah, kind of at least ourselves are positively surprised how good it is. But of course, it's a 3 billion model. It makes some mistake here and there, but we do see kind of it's really promising, right? So I think we are in the phase that is very promising. And I'm kind of optimistic if you get really, really better. But I think at this moment, yeah, it's not as good as the 65 billion like llama model for sure, right? There are actually a lot of things need to be done. But I'm really optimistic about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, model sizes over the years, it feels like they often follow almost like a sawtooth pattern where to broach the next level of quality, often the easiest way to do that has been to get more data in a bigger model. And then with extra effort and time, people are able to preserve that level of quality in a smaller model, whether that's via quantization or distillation or, various other techniques. BERT kind of broke records and was large, and then, DistillBERT becomes a viable option that does pretty close. And then you kind of do similar at each level. So I feel like we're seeing a similar thing here where some of these very large, tens or hundreds of billion parameter models kind of break the new ground. And then there's a lot of exploration right now on how do we get these to more practical sizes that can run on, more standard hardware setups and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So the RedPajama. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, both of them are very important, right? So we do need those big models. So they are generic, right? So they actually show us what could be done, right? And then we also need those more specialized models to actually put into kind of smaller devices to make sure more people have access to them, right? They do not need to be so generic. They can kind of little bit specialized to a certain domain, right? So I think we kind of need this both kind of extreme of the spectrum, right? So, and a whole bunch of things in the middle, right?
Yeah. When these large models, it's making sure they've got the capacity to absorb more of the information that may pass through them. I know one of the hallmarks of the initial kind of release of the RedPajama project was emphasizing we're going to collect this data, make sure that it is clean, available to everybody, and in a substantial size. I believe a trillion tokens was part of that first training run. Training an LLM on a trillion tokens, is this a sort of, set it and forget it? Things are fairly straightforward at this point, or does that require a fair bit of babysitting, to get right? How onerous is that process? Is it largely a cost thing, or are there other kind of technical challenges that are still present today when you train at that size?
Yeah. So I think there are actually a lot of challenges. So I think there are two different perspectives of the babysitting. So the first one is like whether this training run going to converge, right? Whether it's going to kind of diverge at some point and you need to roll back, right? So you of course you need to do that, right? So like you need to make sure, right? So every single day you look at the loss curve. Oh, it's going down, going down, going down, right? So that's one part of babysitting that kind of easier, right? So I think what's actually more important and challenging, and like again, we have no idea how to do that in the ideal way, is how can we make sure that we are getting the model of a good quality in the end, right? So one thing that we are doing when building RedPajama is not only by looking at the training loss, but actually every single day we have a full benchmark run to really see the behavior of the model, the evolution of the quality on different slices of the benchmark task, right? So, and then by just looking at it, we will make sure, oh, maybe the model is making it's moving, like not only kind of fitting the training set better, but actually moving toward a higher quality model, right? So have some confidence that after waiting for 4 weeks, right? So you are going to have something that's actually good. So that's actually a really ad hoc process at this moment. We try to do benchmark as much as we can, but on the other hand, this association between data quality, the benchmark score, and the final model quality, I think connecting these 3 different dimensions is actually need to happen, right? Like someone need to figure out a principal way of doing that, right? And then the whole process will become much, much easier. So right now it's kind of very nerve-wracking in the way that, oh, you don't know what's going to happen, right? So like after you wait for 4 weeks, right? We try to have a whole bunch of intermediate checkpoints and proxy to get a feeling. But I think hopefully at some point, there's going to be a scientific way to, if not certify, but give a more educated guess about the final model quality after training for another 2 weeks, for example. Right?
Yeah. Well, and during these multi-day or even multi-week training operations, as you are kind of monitoring on the daily how it's performing, are there ever mid-training routine adjustments that you make, from one checkpoint to the next, things that you'll modify? Or is it more of a just kind of monitoring progress to know if you need to pull the plugs, to not kind of waste resources on a path that's not working out?
Yeah, so I think for now, our first run is a very clean run in the sense that it's really the same protocol running from the beginning to the end, right? So we do benchmark mainly as part of the understanding, right? About, like to make sure you are actually improving, like to really eliminate all the potential kind of bugs, right? To make sure in the end, we get some model with reasonable quality. We do have another kind of exploration process which haven't influenced the kind of training run, right? For example, we try to understand the quality of different data slices, right, at different checkpoints, try to understand, at this moment, maybe we should put in more of that data. It could converge better, but we haven't pushed all those knowledge back into the training process yet. So the current model is just it's actually the same process, like the original protocol running all the way through 1 trillion tokens.
Yeah, but I think that's what has been the default and the standard, over the history of machine learning to this point. So, certainly makes sense that's what's been using. That is an interesting idea of whether for these long running jobs, it could be more of a dynamic adjustment process where over the course of it, expecting kind of where it is beginning to degrade in a certain area or not be achieving a certain score that you care about, being able to modify there. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so I think so, right? So I think this long running time of large language model and not only bring challenges, but also bring opportunities, right? Because the whole thing is going to run for 4 weeks, right? So you can actually do a whole bunch of things in the middle that doesn't really make too much sense for shorter runs. But here, this adjustment could be very interesting, right? So maybe there's some cheaper way to actually have this dynamic view of data quality, right? Maybe we can actually kind of prioritize different data examples throughout the training run. Maybe we can even have more human in the loop process because it's going to be a very long run, right? I think it really gave us some opportunity to actually kind of bring more rigorous data quality analysis into the process. Yeah.
Yep. No, completely agreed. So when you're training these models, there are, a few different phases of this. The first one being that heavier, month-long pre-training job, and that's where you're running over the trillion plus tokens and more of a self-supervised objective that people are familiar with for these large language models. And then there is the fine-tuning piece that happens next, or instruction tuning, especially if you're trying to make these models work, well for generative tasks, rather than just doing next word prediction. Actually learn to respond to specific questions. Part of what made GPT-3 become ChatGPT was that follow-up training. So a bunch of research models, Alpaca, Vicuna, Koala, and others have trained on the outputs of ChatGPT, which does mean that they have a restricted license and now are only kind of able to be used for research and non-commercial purposes. Instead, you all have trained on data sets that have responses from human volunteers, things that are explicitly kind of open and allowed to be used for other purposes. But what are the challenges of working with that data, where it's now coming from potentially a variety of sources and not even just variety of data sets, but variety of annotators within each one of those sources, and that can result in, I imagine, a much larger variety.
Yeah. So I think for the current instruction data we are using, we are really built on all of those amazing open source projects. We are built on Open Assistant, built on Dolly 2, right? So, and for ourselves, we have been working together with Lion to create this OIG data set. It's not even human response, but we actually take a whole bunch of existing data set and turn them in a weak way into instruction data, right? So called OIG, right? It's really built on like all those like open source projects. So I think one challenge there is they have very different quality level for different data slice. For example, in the OIG data that we have built in together with Lion, so it has some tendency to output a little bit so have different behavior, and for some of them it kind of have different like style of writing. If you look at Dolly 2 and Open Assistant, they will have different focus of the domain, they have different style of the answer. If you just put all of them together into a single pool of data and treat them in a homogeneous way, I mean, sometimes that causes problem, right? So we actually see that in practice when you actually mix the whole OIG, which has like 40 million instructions, with Dolly 2, kind of with Open Assistant, you see this kind of very interesting behavior coming out of the model, right? So I think one of the challenges there is really how can we balance data importance? How can we just filter the data, like reweight the data, and such that we can have all those like heterogeneous kind of piece of data, kind of put them together in a harmonic way, right? So that's really the challenge during fine-tuning in our experience.
Yeah. No, this is a problem that's been of interest to us here at Snorkel as well, because it in many ways is just the parallel situation to what's been happening for predictive applications, for a long time, where you'll have often, data of varying quality, varying sources that you'd like to combine, and that there are ad hoc ways to do this, or sort of naive ways of just kind of dump it all in and hope for the best, and then there are more principled, systematic ways of inspecting what are the distributions of these, what are the slices within this data, where am I underperforming or overperforming, which sources are more trustworthy than others, and all of that, making that process more principled. We can at least our early experience have been showing you can see some pretty significant gains by being intentional about that, while allowing yourself to kind of accept a wider, potentially cheaper, faster, et cetera, collection of inputs, which I think is a pretty promising direction. There's still, in many ways, it seems like early days for these generative tasks, figuring out how do we efficiently evaluate outputs of generative models when you can't just calculate an accuracy score, or how do you efficiently curate data when you can't do the same sort of comparisons against ground truth, for example.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think when we really put them together, right? So I think it's kind of really interesting, the connection between the weak supervision paradigm that Snorkel have been enabling over the years and also pulling different data slides of human response into a larger data set, right? So to some extent, right, every single data slides that we have, even they are generative, right? So they are kind of some weak proxy about kind of an ideal response, kind of maybe twisted in kind of different ways, right? How can you consolidate them? How can you merge them together? How can you filter? How can you relate in, right? So I think figuring out all those problems will be really important for actually building an open model that's actually well aligned with the application, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it'll be a very interesting, next a couple of years as all this gets explored, and as it is actively being explored by ourselves, yourself, and a number of researchers throughout the space. So where do things go from here? We're coming close to time, but what does the open source community have to look forward to with the RedPajama project?
Yeah. So one thing that we are trying to do is we are trying to produce the next version of the RedPajama data, right? So which is going to be much larger, but also with much higher quality and much more diversity compared with the first version. And then again, so we will open up the data, and then there will be a whole bunch of models, and not only from ourselves, but I think more importantly, from more people from the community trained over the RedPajama data coming out soon. Yeah, so I'm kind of really, really excited to share that with you really soon. Yeah, we are kind of working really hard on.
Fantastic. And you mentioned interest in extending to other languages. I mean, obviously, there's always been a bias in terms of web data and often ML research. Working most with English data first. Has that data collection and organization process begun for other languages, trying to find similarly sized corpuses of tokens to use for those pre-training steps?
Yeah. So that's definitely ongoing, right? So there we are actually working with a whole bunch of partners to try to make sure we have someone who really understands the language doing that language, right? So I think that's really important, because when we talk about quality control of a multilingual data set, I think we should really have buy-in for everyone who really know that language. So there we are actually working together with a whole bunch of partners and try to take some steps for different type of languages. We won't do everything, right? But we'll start from maybe a few and then try to understand the recipe. And hopefully, once we open the recipe, there will be people who actually take that recipe and apply it to their own language. So that's why we are really excited about this open data recipe perspective of RedPajama, and we will continue to improve on that perspective.
Yes, no, absolutely. The beauty of open source, the fact that people can fork and take and build on each piece that you release. Yeah, incredibly powerful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Sa. I enjoyed the conversation, others as well. If folks want to follow along the RedPajama project, where's the best place for them to get updates?
Oh yeah, so you can go to together.xyz, right? And then we have a whole bunch of blog posts of RedPajama. The best way is to join our Discord channel, right? So I think the whole Together team actually there's actually amazing community built around RedPajama. So whatever question you have, just ping us on Discord, and we'll be there. Yeah.
Awesome. And Sa and I will be on the Snorkel Slack channel after this if there are any other questions that people had that they weren't able to ask during the session. So back to you, Arti.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sa and Braden. What an exciting discussion.